Now India wants to rev its private ecosystem in space. Till now, the Indian industry has played the role of vendors. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, whom I have called a space buff for long, has unlocked the space sector. And the private industry is going to participate in a big way. On this episode of Life and Science with Pallava, Bagla, can India get a bigger share in the global space ecosystem? But for that, an enabling policy environment and a law all are in the making. India reaching for the skies. It is said sky is the limit, but then that limit is being breached. India is an acknowledged space power. India has satellites in orbit around Moon, Mars, and over 50 operational satellites. India now wants to make a space ecosystem which is vibrant. Until now, most of the space technology was locked up with the Indian Space Research Organization. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has started what is called the unlocking of the space program. Private sector and startups are finding place in a big way. Towards that, several new organizations have come up. And on this show, it is all about catalyzing the space ecosystem. To explain to us the nuances of this journey, we have with us Dr. Pawan Goenka. Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar.
Welcome to the program, Dr. Goenka. Dr. Goenka is a mechanical engineer by training, spent many years researching automobiles, and is now chairman of INSPACe, the government's regulatory and interface body for the Department of Space and the private sector. Dr. Goenka, you are known for your work on automobiles, both in the USA and in India. Most recently, you witnessed the launch of the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle on Valentine's Day. Which was it your first launch you saw?
Yes, it was, Pallavji. The transition from being an automotive engineer all my life to try and understand space little bit.
Little bit.
so late in my career was quite an experience. And I'm thankful that I got an opportunity to learn something totally new from what I've been doing for 42 years. And everybody talks about a launch, right? Everybody talks about how big a launch is and how much it is. But seeing is believing. Till you stand there next to this baby, yes. I don't know if I can call it a baby, but when you stand there 44 meter high, you realize how small you are and where this thing is, right? So just seeing that launch, I mean, it's impossible to describe that experience. I mean, obviously you're not anywhere near the rocket when the launch happens. I'm 5 kilometers away,
Safety
which is closest anyone can be. But it's still this whole lift off, the fire coming out from behind it, zoom, it goes, right? So that experience is, everybody must see it once. Everybody must see it once. I think once you see it, you would really realize what space is all about. And more than that, what is the technology that goes behind it? I mean, we all know that space is complex technology, right? But till I went there,
technology.
But till, I mean, we have been saying something is rocket science, right? I mean, now I realize why they say it's not rocket science or something else, right? So when you stand there and see, and I had a chance to visit the previous day, look at all the preparation that goes towards it, right? it's mind-boggling. I mean, nobody who is...
countdown which can be heard in the air.
If you're not inside, you don't realize what goes behind launching a rocket. The kind of preparation that has to be done, the kind of controls that have to be done, all of those things. So just the whole feeling, I can tell you, Pallavji, is unbelievable. And then 300 plus ton liftoff with flames coming from behind, and it was a cloudy morning, just sort of disappearing in the clouds and then coming out again. And just the picture it paints in the sky is like an artist doing something, a great painting. So I mean, look, I was absolutely zapped with what I saw.
How is it like interacting with India's space community, which is largely restricted right now to the Department of Space?
So again, Pallavji, I had a very pleasant surprise, very nice surprise when I started interacting with scientists and leaders in ISRO. And the reason I say that is that if you look at India's progress in science and technology, there are very few sectors where you can say India is amongst the global leaders. Space is one of those, right? It was really foresight 50 years ago to create the ISRO infrastructure to get amongst the best scientists coming into ISRO from all over India and nurture them, groom them and grow them. The kind of passion that I saw in people, the desire to try and explain their work to me when I interacted with them, the excitement that it was creating in them was just something I had not expected to see. I mean, you look from outside, you have this picture of a government organization, unfortunately, right? It's nothing like that.
It's an island of excellence.
It's nothing like that. I've been to 3 or 4 centers now, and everywhere I see something where I say, oh my goodness, I wish I had this kind of technology in my work in automotive. And one of the things that I would like to see is, can we flow this technology down to other areas, other sectors, other than space?
So you're chairman of INSPACe. Expand INSPACe for us, and what is your role there?
It is a mouthful. It's Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. I hope I got it right.
Yes.
And so the role very simply is this. You started off by saying that a Prime Minister announced about 2 years ago that we would like to bring private enterprise into space. And INSPACe is supposed to be a catalyst for that. What our primary role is to see how private sector can be facilitated, handheld, encouraged to do more and more in space, and also to authorize, because right now all the launches that happen are ISRO launches, and therefore ISRO decides on launches and an outside launch doesn't happen. To authorize private sector to be able to launch their rockets, their satellites, their payloads into orbit is what INSPACe will do. But I see promotion and authorization as a sort of 2 parallel paths for INSPACe to do.
Dr. Goenka, promotion and regulation, normally there are opposite ends of the spectrum. How do you bring them together?
Of course, authorization and regulation is an important part of the role, but I see the promotion as a really exciting issue, exciting part that I hope that INSPACe can do. Because the ecosystem for private sector in space is just coming up. I'm not talking about the vendors to ISRO, that's a very well developed ecosystem, but the ecosystem of startups who can design their own rockets, who can design their own satellites, launch payloads, do downstream applications, is just coming up. And for them to be handheld by a competent authority or competent function and be able to learn the complete end-to-end of space is very important for them to become successful. And that's the role that I hope INSPACe can play and really bring up the startups to a level where they can compete with their global counterparts who are very well developed, very well evolved.
See, you've seen the development of the automobile sector from Fiat, an ambassador, to now a plethora of automobiles. Within this, is India ready to unlock the space sector?
Space is $400 billion economy globally. India is 7-8 billion. Our aspiration is that we should get our fair share. Whether that fair share is be 10%, 5%, 8%, I'm not saying, but get our fair share. That means maybe 5x from where we are today is what we would like to do. Now, India certainly has the opportunity, but nobody should be under a false sense of comfort that ho jayega. It won't happen by itself. ISRO will have to be the primary facilitator of this, because what ISRO has is unbelievable depth of technology.
Yes.
The infrastructure that they have is, I mean, if you go to Sriharikota and look at what they have, you'll just, eyes will pop out. That's who had the sort of foresight to create something like this. So number one, ISRO has to be fully behind it. Okay, fully behind it, not just because they've been asked to do it, but fully behind it. And I see nothing today that makes me doubt that they're not fully behind it. They're absolutely, from the chairman to every person that I interact with, they're fully in favor of supporting private sector to come up in space. But there's the other side to it. The other side is that private sector also has to realize that space is not child's play. Okay, we have many young people in it, and I'm really impressed with the young people who have the vision, aspiration, and the courage to take on something as complex as space. But at the same time, they have to realize that space is a very complex technology. They should not say कि मैं तो ऐसे कर लूँगा. They have to really go deep dive. They have to talk to experts. They have to respect the expertise that ISRO has. And if private sector and ISRO work hand in hand, I think the major battle is won. But that's only one battle. There are smaller battles that we have to fight. The next battle is that space, in terms of commercial remuneration, will take time. It will happen, but it won't happen that you put money here and you get money out down. Okay? There'll be a lot of sort of long tunnel that the money has to go through before it comes down.
So people have to have patience for return on investment.
Absolutely. So therefore, the investors have to come in. And this is not creating a marketplace, something where you, it's fairly complex. I mean, there are two companies that are trying to get a rocket out. And the kind of thing they have to do, having seen the launch now in PSLV, I realize what all they have to do. So therefore, there have to be investors who have to have the patience to invest in space technology. Returns will be there, but it will take time. So that's the second thing that has to happen. And third thing is that we all who are trying to make it happen have to have patience, that it won't happen tomorrow. It's going to take some time because even a simple launch requires a lot of preparation to happen. So therefore, if we put these three things in place, India is in a very strong position because we have the technology, we have the infrastructure, we have the low cost. All of this you put together, and India perhaps has as good, if not better, opportunity for really playing into the space sector.
Dr. Goenka, there has been a talk about private consortia taking on what are called repeat launches and doing the commercial launches of the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle and the upcoming other launches. What movement have you seen on that?
SSLV is a new animal, so to say, right? And in a sense, as we move forward, and as we have more and more low Earth orbit (LEO) launches, it will be the small satellite launch that would be really gaining in volume. So what I would like to see is that SSLV should be completely private sector ownership. And at some point of time, ISRO may decide, which is under consideration, to transfer the complete technology of SSLV to private sector, not just as a manufacturer, but as a business proposition, where you own, you operate, you get business, you launch.
And launch from Sriharikota.
And launch from Sriharikota or somewhere else. And that will be the real game changer. Making PSLV a private sector is good, but that's not a game changer. The real game changer will be if SSLV is completely owned, operated, manufactured, operated, and commercial sort of consideration, everything by private sector.
Now, see, that is on rockets. On satellites, one has already seen private sector assembling satellites, and you will witness the launch of EOS-4. What is the movement on that, sir?
So still at infancy. The role that private sector played in EOS-4 was more than in the past, but still it's an ISRO design. It's an ISRO ownership. Eventually we need to get to a point where private sector is able to completely design satellite, manufacture it, sell it to the users, and that's how the whole industry ecosystem will develop. And this is a good first step. And we have to take steps like this. Don't expect that overnight ISRO will not need to do anything and private sector will do everything. It has to be a process where ISRO sort of gets off from certain things and private sector takes up, but it has to be a complete partnership. I want to stress this point again and again. It has to be a complete partnership between ISRO and private sector. Both players have to be in it together in letter and spirit to make it happen.
Now, see, till now what we have seen in the last several decades, it's mostly a supply-driven model in India's space sector. Can we transform it to a demand-driven and also look at global demands?
So this is the big change that is happening right now. And as we make any change, there are certain sort of nuances that come in, and so does this change. But let me put it this way. Coming from industry, I will always say that demand-driven is the best way to run business, never push supply. That there's no question about. At the same time, if you are in sales and marketing, the bosses will tell you that if I don't put pressure on you, then my sales will go down. So therefore, I have to create demand. Hence, there has to be a target that yes, it's demand-driven, but we have to create demand for 8 launches a year, 12 launches a year, 15 launches a year. And that responsibility has to be on the sales and marketing wing of whoever is creating the demand, in this case NSIL, right? If we don't do that, then our number of launches will start going down.
We are already 2 launches in 2 years.
So, and we cannot become a big space sector nation if we are not doing dozen plus launches every year consistently of the PSLV and GSLV. We cannot really become meaningful. And therefore, we have to play a game of demand-driven in the sense that ISRO should not make things that there is no pull for, but at the same time, pull has to be created. We cannot say if pull is for 2 rockets, we'll do 2 rockets. We have to ensure that we're able to do 10, 12, 15.
Dr. Goenka, while ISRO is one level and you have the big industries which are vendors, Larsen and Toubro, Walchandnagar, Godrej, but the startup ecosystem is revving up. You've interacted with some of them. What is your feeling on India's space startups?
So Pallabji, that is the most exciting part of the space journey that we're embarking on. My sort of belief in startups, not just from space but from many years ago, is that they are going to disrupt whatever they get into. Right? We will not make the kind of advancement that we want to make in space without startups being there. Now, by definition, startups are starry-eyed. By definition, they are risk takers. By definition, they do not believe in status quo. That's what startups are all about, and that's what I have seen in all the space startups. I've been personally interacted with at least a dozen, if not more, in the last 2-3 months. And they really have very high aspirations for what they want to do. I mean, when I go home and sometimes talk to my family and say, I met this 23-year-old kid who wants to do this, and they said, but how can they do that? I said, I don't know, but they know. And not everybody will succeed, we know that. But if 3 or 4 succeed out of 8 or 9, we have a big sort of advancement happening.
Space industry, startups are all rearing to go. India has an important program called Gaganyaan, which is to launch an Indian in space from Indian soil on an Indian rocket. But for the private sector to play a role in that, one needs an enabling environment of policy and law. And let me say here, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, one has seen a space buff in South Block. He is driving India's space ecosystem. Dr. Goenka, let's go outside into fresh air and talk how we will rev the ecosystem of policy, law and liability. Dr. Goenka, we are now in fresh air. Is there going to be fresh air and new breath in terms of policy environment for space?
Definitely, Pallavji, because as I came into this role, the first thing that I realized was that if we don't have policies, I cannot start in-space business, because in-space will be really implementing the policy. And I've been working very closely with the whole ISRO team, with the chairman ISRO, to ensure that policies get launched quickly. Now, we have taken a major decision of moving away from having 7-8 policies to one common policy that covers everything. So that process, omnibus space policy, one policy. So that process took some time. We were almost ready, but then we had to redraft the whole thing. In fact, just last night, I have reviewed the final draft. It will go for consultation with the industry in the next 2 or 3 days, and then we are pretty much ready to go to Space Commission for approval. So I'm hopeful that within the next 2 months or so, we will have the policies in place.
So will it reflect the reform process which the government wants?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the main thing that we have achieved in this policy. The private sector, I think, will be very happy with the way we are approaching it. A lot of things that are restricted have been opened up, and tremendous role for ISRO defined in the policy to handhold the industry to bring them up to the level where they can be independently doing spacecrafts and launches.
Now, space policy is one, and this is music to my ears, because those discrete several policies and intertwined in them, if you have one omnibus policy, I'm sure the space ecosystem will love it. But there is also the need for having a law, a space law. What is the move towards having a space law?
That's next in line. We decided that even though law should precede policy, but we decided that policies are must for us to start moving towards private sector participation. So we have done that first. The space law will be next that ISRO will take up. I will personally get involved in that and try and get that out as quickly as possible. But once the space policies are in place, almost everything else that we want to do through INSPACe, we can do.
Dr. Goenka, private players, when they come in, there is this whole issue of liability. Today, the Department of Space is government-owned, and the liability is taken by the taxpayer and the government. What about liability when the private sector comes up? How are you looking at that?
Fortunately, many nations have already tackled this thing, and what is being done in almost all cases is private sector takes responsibility up to a certain level. There's a limit of liability that private sector would have. Beyond that, the government will take liability, and that's the same thing we will do. We will define the threshold as to up to what level the private sector will be responsible, and beyond that, the government will be responsible. And we have talked to private sector about this, and I think everybody is very comfortable. That's fair, because it's not fair to expect that the government will take complete responsibility of liability for when the private sector is for launching their own vehicles.
Dr. Goenka, one of the mandates of INSPACe, where you are the chairman, is to become the single window clearance. Space is a domain which intertwines with many ministries and international domains. Is that a big task given to you, and how are you going to tackle that?
Well, yes, it's a big task, but at the same time, I think it's a very important thing for us to do. Otherwise, the private sector could be going round and round and never really get a resolution. Fortunately, everybody is aligned to it. I have talked to the other department secretaries personally. They're all aligned to making INSPACe a single window clearance for the private sector for space-related activities, which is very good. But I'm new to the government. I still have to see how everything will function. The support is there even at the Space Commission. The Space Commission wants in space to be a single window clearance. So I think we'll manage it. And once we manage it, it could in fact become a way to work for many different things in the government, where the private sector doesn't have to go door to door. There is a single window, and that will really be great. But I'm not going to assume that it's going to be an easy task. It's a task that we are all committed to doing.
So you will run the marathon and the 100-meter sprint on behalf of the private sector?
Absolutely, because I'm the promoter also. Keep in mind, I'm not just the regulator, but I'm the promoter also.
Now we have with us India's Bahubali rocket, the GSLV Mark III, the rocket which will take India's astronauts possibly into space. As chairman of INSPACe, what is your outlook and where do you see India heading in the short term, medium term and long term in space ecosystem?
So let me start off with a long-term vision. Right now we are defining, ISRO DOS Secretary is defining, a Space Commission will be looking at it on where we want to see ourselves 10 years, 20 years from now. Right? And then having that big vision work backwards to see what role ISRO will play in that, what role private sector will play in that, and how do we make it happen. Right? Now clearly, one of the two very important things that we need to do, one is that we should remain firmly in place in the scientific missions. We should not back off from that, because scientific mission, in a way, lead the commercial missions, right? So that is, the full plan is there, and we will continue to evolve that plan. And second is to do more and more in commercial, where right now, India has a very small share, 1.5% of the global economy of space. We need to get to 7, 8, 10% share in that. And then what are the steps that are required for that? So this is all work in progress. But we have to first take baby steps before we take giant steps. So what I'm looking forward to from private sector is that in the next 12 months, we'll probably have about 5 or so payloads of private sector going up in ISRO launches. I'm looking forward to 2 small launch vehicles going into suborbital launch towards the end of this year. And if we can achieve this, and one real, what I call real satellite of private sector going up towards the end of the year. So if we can achieve all of these things, then I think we have made the beginning of private sector playing a space game, not a vendor game, but a space technology game. Right? At the same time, we also need to make space mainstream. Right now, space in the eyes of public is something mystique. They don't even realize, most people, what all space does for us. So therefore, the outreach that in fact ISRO does quite a bit of, I was surprised, quite a bit of outreach ISRO does. We need to make it more and more prominent, more structured. We need to bring in the students. In fact, there is a plan to launch 75 student satellites middle of this year. So bring in more student interest very early to learn space technology and get into space as a career. And that's again something that INSPACe will work with ISRO to make it happen. So the promotion side, the small baby steps that we take this year, and the long-term plan that we have coming together, I hope that when you interview somebody standing here 10 years from now, we'll have a very different story to tell.
Exciting times?
Exciting times, exciting times. I mean, I never thought that I would come into the space sector and play a role here and learn so much about something totally new to me. Even though I'm an R&D person, but the automotive R&D and the space technology are two totally vastly different subjects.
You are, as they say, a Marwari entrepreneur who's done well, and I hope you will give India a space ecosystem which India can love. Thanks a lot for
I can only play a
us.
small role in this, Pallavji. The major task here is ISRO, and I can hopefully play a small facilitating role. That's about it.
Thanks a lot for speaking
Thank
to
you.
us, sir. India is already a space power to reckon with over 50 operational satellites and 2 satellites, one in the orbit of Earth and one in the orbit of Mars. India's space ecosystem is rearing to go forward and make full commercial sense. For that, the policy environment, the law, and the technology are all falling in place. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who I have called many times a space buff, is leading from the front for the unlocking of the space sector. India wants the rightful share in the space economy, and it is geared for going there. Keep watching India Science.